Hey guys, welcome back to my knitting podcast. That's kind of a knitting podcast, kind of not. Last time I noticed my freaking lips were crusty. So I'm going to put on some Aquaphor this time and not make anyone stare at that for like a half hour. I look like that kid who's had like the red ring around their mouth all the time. All right, I'm really hoping the audio is good for this as well. I have a new setup and I'm pretty excited about it. But that means I've never played with it or really troubleshooted anything yet, so you'll have to bear with me. Daily dork. Drinking? Nothing. I should be drinking water because I'm breastfeeding and I'm probably severely dehydrated as it is the end of the day. And I cannot stop staring at the viewfinder, so that's my bad. But drinking? Nothing. I'll drink water before bed. Oh, what was, This is kind of a bad segment because I don't really want to stand up. Where I'm at, I have limited space to show you. But just trust, I'm not wearing an outfit mullet this time. I am technically kind of still wearing pajama bottoms, but they're cute, so they count as regular pants to me. And then a little tight top from H&M. Reading. Bad news. I told you guys I was going to start Alchemize by Celine Yu. And I did start it. I have not read anything beyond the first chapter, so that's on me. Because I really want to discuss it for those of you who have read it, which could be some of you, could be none of you. Okay, I am knitting the Chunky August hood. Can't remember who wrote it. I always put the pattern at the top. I'm going to do the rabbit ears, and I'm super excited. This is going to be for my newborn baby because I don't have any newborn size or 0 to 3 month size hoods right now. I have a whole bunch of balaclavas that I knit last year that have lasted my kids through this year because I knit them probably a size too big, but I figured I would get this one done and off my needles. And so far it's been a pretty quick knit. It's slightly bigger than DK weight yarn, and I'm using a superwash wool from Sublime, and I love it. If you saw my mini pod yesterday, you saw this. And I haven't made a ton of progress except for I finished the front and the back bib, and then I'm working on the face, and then I'll add the ears. So that's what I'll be working on while we chat today. And today's topic is the ethicality, which is a word, by the way. The ethicality of knitting. Knitting in mass, where you see a lot of people bulk buying yarn, planning dozens and dozens of projects for the year in advance, buying yarn for it, impromptu projects after the fact. Oops, I really shouldn't be doing this at the same time that I'm talking. Okay, so I need to rib. One sec. Pearl. Shiz. Anyways, like I said, we're talking about the ethicality of knitting. Is it ethical to do the things that I just mentioned? Or when is knitting too much? How many garments are too many garments? So on and so forth. Let me pull up my outline. I did come a lot more prepared than I was last time. Last time I was super nervous. And I have to say thank you to those of you who commented, all 150 something of you that watched last week's episode. I feel really good, I guess I should say, about posting online. I don't really get nervous anymore. I don't really care if what I say has substance or value to other people as long as it has substance and value to me. And it was interesting to see a lot of, or the comments that related to last week's episode. And I'm sorry if you related, but it's always nice to know you're not alone. And I know that a lot of people felt that way too. I am in a new spot, obviously, you can tell. I'm not in my bedroom in my rocking chair facing the windows. I'm actually in my mother-in-law's sewing room. We are in a multi-generational household situation for the next, actually, month and a half. We just found a place that we really like and we're excited to move into to rent for the next year. But my mother-in-law has a really cool setup downstairs. She sews in here and she clearly has a great yarn selection. She's actually the one who got me into knitting. and gave me some of my first exposure to working with natural fibers like wool and cotton. Because like most people, when I first started knitting and crocheting, I was really into whatever I could afford, which was acrylic or cotton acrylic blends, which is a great place to start. But I think something that we're going to talk about today is there are still ways to knit and crochet affordably with natural fibers. And I think that they just are lesser known options. And where you have big stores like Hobby Lobby, Joann's, Michael's, it is kind of easy to just pop in and get whatever they have, which is a lot of those, I don't want to say unnatural fibers, but fibers that essentially shed differently than natural fibers, and they wear natural or differently than natural fibers. So we're going to talk about ethicality of knitting and the nuances there. And then I actually had a couple of really good questions in the comments, and then a lot of good private messages that asked questions that I kind of wanted to go into a little bit more today, because I think that OCD is kind of a confusing, I don't want to say mental illness, but it's a confusing diagnosis. And if you think you have it and you want to stick around to kind of hear a little bit more about it, I'm going to talk about that in the second half. I'm going to try and be better about adding timestamps so that people can skip around as they please. But yeah, let's just get right into it. I've seen a lot of conversations surrounding sustainable knitting, the ethicality, whether or not you should feel guilty about having a stash or knitting en masse for yourself or gift knitting and things like that. And from my viewpoint, knitting is not single use. I feel like I should bring you guys down so you can see that I'm actually working on something. From my point of view, knitting is not single use. It is something that, depending on the fiber that you knit with, it can be passed down for generations. It can be preserved. I feel like knitting garments has history. I think that it's very sentimental, and not in like a hoarder type of way, but in a way where the regular clothes that we buy and consume just don't have. So knitting is inherently slow fashion. It takes time. It's a slow process, especially if you're like me. I'm kind of a slow knitter. I have moments of being able to, why do I have a stuffy nose all of a sudden? Anyways, I'm not a fast knitter by any means. I like to take my time with my personal projects. That's why a lot of the projects that I do finish are for my kids, because they grow so fast. If you take your time, they may not fit in it by the time you're done. But where I feel like I'm kind of at a place in my life where I'm not really growing or changing or fluctuating too much, I can take more time with my garments. And I prefer the slow process. I feel like it's more fun for me. I enjoy it a little bit more. I don't have any pressure. There's no deadlines, which is kind of why posting knitting content initially was a little bit overwhelming to me, because I know that some of the most popular creators when it comes to slow fashion in the knitting world they're just speed knitters. They get things done so quickly, and it's really fascinating for people to be able to watch that process start to finish in a digestible amount of time. They don't have to wait weeks or months to see the finished project. It's pretty immediate, and that gratification, that instant gratification, is what draws a lot of people in. And I felt like, dang, people may like what I'm putting out when it's for my kids because it's small and it's fast, but I don't always have things I need to make my kids. They get their yearly birthday sweater and they get these winter items, but outside of that, a lot of the knitting that I do is for myself, and it takes time. And like I said, I create things for longevity. I plan to wear these things for years. That's why I have a couple of really fun, colorful items, but for the most part, I wear stuff that can be styled again and is not necessarily going to go out of fashion as quickly as I think buying trendy or popular clothing items from stores would. And that's kind of how I feel about having a stash. You have the ability to make clothes long term. It's hopefully something that you're planning on utilizing at some point. If not, I think there's a lot of really good ways to kind of not get rid of, your stash but minimize it by giving yarn to a friend who's just getting into the hobby, or by secondhand selling on eBay. And I don't know if that makes sense. I personally have not been able to really utilize eBay as an option, not because it isn't an option for me, but because I'm kind of bad about finding the fibers that I want. And I too am a victim of being able to buy things in bulk and have it be easy. And so I do tend to look for stores that carry all of the fiber that I need for a project in one go. I don't want to order from a bunch of different places, which is probably the more ethical way to do it, is finding people who are getting rid of it. But then also sometimes I worry about dye lots, because if you're not buying from the same dye lot, you might have some variety in your project, which could be really cool and very unique. But I think it would be something that drives me absolutely insane. Someone that I actually really admire, that is a creator on both YouTube and TikTok that I've seen, is Camille. I can put her handle. She, every time I come across one of her videos, she's going to a secondhand store for scrap yarn, or she's shopping local, or she's finding stuff on eBay. And I'm really impressed by that, and I'm really glad there are people out there who that absolutely works for. I just am not that person. But I also don't buy a lot of stuff in bulk. Like I have a good stash, but it's because of having leftover small hanks or skeins from other projects, and they all have a purpose. Most of them just get turned into blankets or dish rags and things like that. Other than that, I really don't plan my projects ahead of time. I finish a project, I research something that I've been interested in, and then I'll usually go buy yarn for it after that. And I don't have like a huge list of things that I want to knit. I have screenshot inspo, but I don't really pre-plan my projects, if that makes sense. When I finish something, if I'm feeling inspired or have a desire to fill another hole in my closet, then I'll go through some of my saved patterns and find something that I'm wanting to work on. But for the most part, it's kind of just knit to knit. But I don't ever buy yarn without a plan as well. So I don't go shopping in a store and think like, oh, that's a beautiful yarn, I would love to buy that, and just hold on to it until something comes to mind that I do want to knit. I think that would make me feel anxious, just having all of that extra yarn taking up space and taking up brain space for me, because I also have ADHD, and the clutter and stuff like that makes me feel non-functional. And it works for my mother-in-law, but it doesn't work for me, and it's really pretty in her sewing room, but even this would be really hard for me. I do think that there is fast fashion with knitting, though. I think that there are certain styles or trends that people knit with the intention of wearing for a long time, but then realize that it's not really a timeless piece. And there's, in my opinion, nothing really truly wrong with that, because, again, I think that for the most part, knitting is slow fashion, even if you are knitting to fit trends. But my biggest concern is the fiber that people are using. If they are planning to resell or get rid of it, and it's not something that they plan on having in their closet long term, because you do have to keep microplastics in mind. They are not biodegradable. They will not return to the earth quite as well as a 100% wool wood or a 100% plant fiber wood. Animal fibers and plant fibers are going to be your best bet, but also I think that they kind of feel the best. I know that there's some blends that are meant for washing and they do feel soft, but they wear and they pill like crazy over time. And that's actually something I've noticed with some projects that I've finished. 100% wool versus even my, what is it, the Lang Cloud Glow cardigan that I knit just a couple of months ago. I've worn it 8 to 10 times and I can already see some wear on it. And I'm not someone who's particularly rough with my clothing, especially my knits. I will wear them and then I will put them back on a hanger and not touch them, and they don't get a lot of friction. But I feel like that one, because it is mixed with synthetic fibers, does look a lot more worn. than some of the knits that I've had for years. So I've seen a lot of discourse too about how many hand garments are too many, or handmade garments are too many handmade garments in your closet. And I think that depends on what your plans are for your garments. For me, I have 3 daughters. And so my plan is that what I'm knitting for myself will eventually end up in their closet, I hope. And that's kind of the purpose too of me knitting for longevity with styles and colors and stuff, less so than trends. I think that those will still be some fun items for them to have and see from when I was in my 20s versus when they'll be in their 20s. But a lot of the projects that I make, I plan to keep in good condition for them to be able to wear when they're adults. And as far as the kid knits that I make, I also kind of plan on my kids maybe, like this is a dream, is my kids having an interest in letting their kids wear them someday too. I will say I use superwash, which is processed wool so that you can wash it. I do use that for my kids' projects just because kids are gross. That's just the truth. They are freaking nasty, and you have to be able to wash their stuff, and hand washing every single item is not always feasible. So if it's something like a sweater or pants or a hat, I will make them out of machine washable wool. All of their garments are mendable. So my kids can wear them and do whatever they want. What did I do here? Oh, nothing. I have been watching a lot of videos on mending garments and things like that. And I feel like with natural fibers, or at least with the knits that I've made, even out of like superwash and stuff, they're really easy to mend. Whereas like my kids' clothes that I buy from stores, maybe their dresses and stuff that aren't made out of natural fibers, it is a lot harder. Like where it's a stretchy rayon or polyester, it's kind of hard to mend them in a way where they retain their like structural integrity. They may stretch and stuff like that. And so I try to steer clear of that. I'm not a purist, and I actually reserve zero judgment. And I'm a lot less strict with thrifted items. I want to give those kinds of non-natural fibers a second life if possible. And so my kids get to play really rough in those. And my whole point with this is not to harp on natural versus non-natural fibers, or whether or not what you're doing is sustainable or ethical because you use those. It's just I've seen this conversation so many times, and I've seen so many people feel guilty about this hobby, and I guess I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around why you'd feel guilty about it, because I do feel like even when you're purchasing a ton of yarn and you're purchasing a lot of patterns and you are knitting and knitting and knitting, I still feel like it is way more ethical and sustainable when done in a way that is intentional, or as intentional as you can, than purchasing from stores that really just want to profit, and it's not made to order items or pre-order items so that they're not ending up with a bunch of overstock and inventory. I guess really I just don't feel very much guilt for this hobby because, one, I find it therapeutic, but then two, I feel as though all of my knits have a purpose and they have a home and they have someone in mind, me in mind, my kids in mind, and I've learned to be more intentional. I think in the beginning, I was, one, just not aware how many different fibers there were to work with and the longevity that each of them offered. And so I knit with things like acrylic or acrylic cotton blends because they were just affordable, and they are actually the things that did not hold up and stand the test of time and have not made it through even a year or two of wear and tear. So my whole point is to kind of just educate how to make your projects last longer for you if that's something important to you as well. For example, this is not clutter. This is not something that my kids will wear once and then grow out of, and I'll have to give to the thrift stores or DI or whatever. These are things that, because I knit them intentionally, I can kind of modify the sizing, or I can make it so that it lasts several seasons And instead of giving them to the thrift because they have meaning to me, not maybe my kids, I can hold on to them. I can preserve them in a way that my kids could be able to use them for their own kids, or I could give it to a friend who has a baby the same age. I think, I don't know, that being intentional really is just what will make such a big difference. I don't know. Maybe this is all sounding stupid and pretentious, but I'm also not very good, like I said, in linear storytelling. So my main points with that entire conversation were: you knit for longevity, not consumption. Hand knits as heirlooms. You can pass these items down for generations if preserved well, especially with the context of what fiber you're using. And ethical knitting is intentional knitting, not rule following. Okay, now that I've beat that horse literally to death, let's move on to OCD, another super fantastic topic. Like, if I could just make this a little bit more boring, I would. Like I said, I wanted to talk more about OCD deeply because I've had so many good questions from people who are struggling and wondering if this is something maybe that they need to be discussing with their medical providers. And there were a couple of private messages that I received where people were confusing OCPD and OCD. And that's a common conflation. And I think that no one ever really takes the time to explain that. They'll just be like, oh, that's not OCD. Oh, you like to clean? That's not OCD. Oh, you like straight lines? That's not OCD. And people will get really defensive. And honestly, rightfully so, if you feel like that fits your definition of what OCD is, but there isn't definition for people who have that personality when it comes to cleanliness or orderliness, organization, straight lines, things feeling right. And that is OCPD. OCPD is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, whereas OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. And I also want to talk about OCD and ADHD, and how sometimes they can look similar and people can sometimes be misdiagnosed, or one can be mistaken for the other, or sometimes you have both and one is just masked by the other and can cause more issues, in my opinion, when you're looking to treat your OCD or your ADHD. So one of the questions I was asked was, how was I diagnosed? I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist. I talked to my medical provider initially, my just regular PCM, and they had recommended that I link up with a psychiatrist. So I got a referral. I went to my psychiatrist and I brought up my concern about OCD. I had already been diagnosed with ADHD as a teenager when I was 19, I believe. And so I had been on medication at that point, but I honestly felt like it was worsening my OCD symptoms. And even though I hadn't been officially diagnosed with OCD, I knew that's what this was based off of conversations with other people who had OCD who were telling me like, hey, I've had the exact same experience. But like I said, I went into my psychiatrist. I'm trying to remember the name of the actual test. Okay, yes. So the official YBOCS, this is what they did. It is the Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale, which is used in conjunction with a clinical interview and diagnoses, okay? They may run like physical exams or blood tests, not for OCD, but to rule out other things, because there's no lab test, obviously, for OCD, but they also have the Obsessive Compulsive Inventory and the Children's Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale. And it's used in conjunction as well with the DSM-5. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't even remember exactly what the inventory or the clinical diagnostic procedure was when it came to diagnosing me with OCD. I just remember meeting with my psychiatrist. So if you're looking for how to get diagnosed and who to talk with, that would be with a qualified therapist who's able to diagnose those things, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist. I wanted to talk about religious OCD. And if I look over, I'm looking at my phone because I wrote an outline so that I didn't go way too off the grid with my stupid storytelling. So I had religious OCD. I honestly think that was my very first OCD thing. Um, it is often called scrupulosity. And it is the fear of sinning or being morally bad. It involves intrusive thoughts about morality or punishment, and you have compulsions like reassurance seeking or excessive mental checking. I want to emphasize that those intrusive thoughts that you have throughout having OCD, they are not a reflection of your morality or your moral beliefs. In fact, it's usually in direct opposition to what you actually believe, what your actual morals are. But anyways, that's why it's so intrusive. And there were times as a kid, I remember going into my mom and dad's room and compulsively telling them the truth about things that probably were not that big of a deal. White lies, ways I handled conversations with people, etc., where I just felt like I had to tell my parents because I could not go to sleep without doing this. I could not go to sleep without confessing my sins to my parents. I could not go to sleep without long freaking prayer, trying to detail as many of the sins and asking for forgiveness for as many of the sins that I could remember that were on my mind. And then I could not go to sleep without writing in my journal. Um, Last time I discussed how I used to write in my journal and draw a giant heart and write all of the names of the people that I wanted to save in my journal. But I I really don't feel like I quite understood. I did not believe that I was a bad person. I did not believe that I was doing all these terrible things, but that was part of the I'm going to hell. It was part of the because I don't think I'm a bad person. I probably am actually a bad person. And that's why I need to be doing this compulsively, because otherwise the evil in me is winning if I don't do this. And in my own way, it was like proving that I was a good person because I was willing to do this. I don't know. Like I said, OCD isn't meant to make sense. And you know the entire time you're going through it that it doesn't make sense. But that's why it's such a messed up thing to have to deal with. So then I also have dealt with rumination. Rumination is not the same as overthinking. I will have conversations with people who are trying to relate to rumination and they think that overthinking is the same thing, and that is their way of being empathetic and sympathetic is, oh, I overthink too, and that's, oh my gosh, it's so annoying. And I get it, overthinking really is annoying, but it is to the point of consuming my every single thought and every single conversation that I have with other people too. I remember getting into a fight with a friend in high school, and for years, I could not stop having the same conversations over and over in my head. I could not stop the thought spiral that I would have to come to the conclusion that I was not wrong or they were right here or I was wrong there, whatever it was. I would spiral for days too, just thinking about the same thing over and over and over again. And I remember having a conversation with my dad about those feelings, and this was before I was diagnosed, obviously, but my dad was like, what you need to do is you need to write down your problem and then solve it on paper. That way, when you start to spiral like this, you can just refer down the list of, oh, I've already been here, I've already thought about this, etc. And it helped to an extent, but because I didn't know that this was rumination, I didn't know that I had OCD. I didn't realize that I was also kind of feeding into that compulsion of overthinking, because then now I had it written down and I had a frame of reference. And sometimes that can make it worse. That is why knitting for me has been a really grounding tool when it comes to rumination and OCD and my other compulsions, because I can sit here and I can knit for hours without a single thought in my head except for knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Refer to my pattern, knit, purl, knit, purl. And that has been the best way for me to deal with my OCD, because it's not avoidance. It's, I mean, maybe it is kind of a little bit avoidance, but it's better than turning to a different pattern of rumination or a different compulsion, like pulling out my eyelashes or chewing the inside of my mouth to freaking death. Now, OCPD. I want to clear up what OCPD is in relation to OCD. And OCPD stands for Obsessive Compulsion Personality Disorder, and it is a mental health condition characterized by a pervasive pattern of preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and control that interferes with flexibility, openness, and efficiency. People with OCPD see their rigid behaviors as rational and beneficial, contrasting with OCD, where compulsions are often unwanted. Key traits include excessive devotion to work, inability to delegate, hoarding, stubbornness, and rigid moralizing, often leading to distress and impaired relationships. The core characteristics of which are perfectionism, orderliness in rules, control, it's work-focused, very rigid, and miserliness, which is like being stingy with your money, which I guess would contribute to the control of wanting to have money in order to deal with unforeseen circumstances that you maybe wouldn't normally have control over. What's interesting is OCPD, dealing with control, is kind of opposite to where OCD feels very uncontrolled. You feel like, oh my gosh, these things are unwanted. I have zero control over my thoughts. I can't get these things out of my brain. And OCPD is wanting to exercise that control to the nth degree. And I don't know if that's making it any more clear now that I'm saying it out loud, but anyway. Some of the other key differences that I noticed are OCD is ego-dystonic and OCPD is ego-systonic or ego-syntonic. OCD feels wrong, like your thoughts feel wrong, and OCPD, you want things to like feel right, behaviors and things like that would probably cause issues, especially in a relationship. OCPD is perfectionism driven and OCD is anxiety driven. Let's talk about how ADHD and OCD kind of work together. And for me, ADHD, I remember growing up, so both my brothers also have ADHD, and I was never diagnosed. They were diagnosed young, but I was never diagnosed because I did okay in school, whereas my brothers were just, off the charts, really struggling. And I remember not thinking that I had ADHD. I just kind of thought I was dumb because I didn't have the same patterns that my brothers exhibited with their ADHD, where they were kind of unable to sit still. They were really chatty and impulsive and loved to interrupt and destructive even. I was a lot more calm. I exhibited more of the lack of executive function when it came to ADHD, and that's kind of the difference between boys and girls. And so I was never diagnosed. I was never medicated as a kid. And the way that that showed up for me, without the tools to be able to kind of work on both my ADHD and my OCD, was that I had a lot of noise in my brain from my ADHD, and that only was made worse by the rumination and the constant cyclical thoughts and the patterns and things like that. So when I did get diagnosed with ADHD as an adult and I was put on, I believe it was a stimulant. I don't remember what the first thing I ever was put on was, but it made me so unbelievably anxious, and it made my OCD so much worse because I was having worse anxiety and I felt more panicked, and it caused a lot of my OCD symptoms to worsen. And then it also pushed me to it pushed me to have other themes of OCD, like relationship OCD. So I ended up stopping my medication. And that was around the time that I ended up getting pregnant, went through my whole pregnancy, struggling with both. And then postpartum, when I initially went in for my depressive symptoms, brought up the concern of OCD. And I went into my psychiatrist and she asked if I was on any medications. And I told her that I had ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD and that I had been on a stimulant but stopped because of pregnancy. And we had gotten through the clinical testing for my OCD, she had brought up the fact that probably the reason why my OCD was so much more rampant was because I was on a stimulant. And normally what they like to do is put you on an SSRI to kind of help make you feel more baseline and then introduce stimulants or other medications to help you kind of, what's the word? Regulate your ADHD. I think that's part of why my prepartum anxiety and depression was so much worse than my postpartum. I still had it, but like it was so much worse before I got pregnant, but was planning to get pregnant because I was on my ADHD medication. I'm trying to think if there were any other questions that people had. I don't know. If you have any other questions, let me know, but I'm glad that we could talk about this a little bit more. It was sad to see that a lot of you can relate, but like I said, it is always nice to know that you're not alone in something that you struggle with. And obviously, you know you're not alone, but it is validating to your experience when you know that other people have that shared experience. But it is really sad to know that anyone has also struggled with those thoughts. And to the point of me speaking about how it's really hard to come across videos that are triggering for my OCD, that is not meant to make people feel bad. I know that right now, where we have so many videos and topics so readily accessible to us, it's kind of hard to not just sit and scroll. And I think it's really also very easy for people to kind of not see other people as real people or the events that are happening to them as real, because it is so easy to just move on from it. As in physically swipe up and move on from that video. But that's why I really don't do a lot of scrolling. And I think that's part of why I'm trying to get more into content creation too, is because I want to have a more positive impact on what's being put out there, or a more positive take, because I do feel positively. I do feel like there is a lot of good that's happening in the world, and I do want to showcase that. I know that life's not always great, it's not always positive, but I don't think that I think that it's really incongruent how much negativity is shared online. And yeah, I don't know. Next week, I think I kind of want to talk about a hobby ecosystem. Knitting is not my only hobby, and I know that I am always interested to see how people have things organized and how they cycle through their hobbies. I think it's interesting, and I come across videos and I can watch them. So yeah, I hope today was a good day for you. I hope that this conversation was fun for you, because it was fun for me. It was a nice way to kind of decompress at the end of my day, but it is time for me to go to bed and hopefully to cast this off. So I will see you guys next week in my mini pod. Bye guys.